My name is Sophia Whitmore, 33 years old, a former state prosecutor from Austin, Texas. And that night at my father's 65th birthday dinner, I honestly thought maybe this time would be different. I walked into the Whitmore estate holding a silk-wrapped picture frame, an old photo of me and Dad on my law school graduation day. I thought it was the moment he'd been most proud of me. I had it framed hoping it might remind him, I'm still here. I'm still the daughter who did everything right. But he didn't even look at it, just pushed it aside like an unpaid bill. Then he raised his glass, turned to my younger brother Landon tailored suit, blinding smile, and declared, to the real future of this family. My mom clinked her glass without saying a word. I sat there, hands still on the photo, like a kid waiting for a pat on the head that never came. I didn't argue. I just gave a polite smile, stood up and said, I had an early morning. They called me too sensitive. But they didn't see me afterward sitting in my car parked in the dark lot behind the house crying so hard I could barely breathe. I clutched that photo like it was the only thing that hadn't betrayed me. There's a special kind of grief in being alive while your family treats you like you've already died. That night I started to understand I might keep walking forward, but no one was walking with me anymore. A few weeks later I got a text from Landon. Governor's hosting a gala. I've got an extra invite. You should come for the family image. I almost deleted it. But something stopped me. A part of me still hoped maybe this time they'd see me, not as the troublemaker, not as the one who embarrassed the Whitmore name, just as me, Sophia. I pulled out a navy blue dress I hadn't worn in 4 years, dusted off a pair of faded heels, and swiped on the same red lipstick I wore to my first interview at the Texas Attorney General's office. Walking into the downtown Austin hotel, I felt like a ghost haunting a room full of power. I stayed near the catering line at the very back where no one important would notice. Then Governor Alan Foy passed by. He slowed, looked directly at me. Wait, you're the senator. The air shifted. Glasses froze mid-toast. My mother's, father's, and Landon's heads all turned at once. And in that moment, no one clapped. No one smiled. No one said a word. But for the first time in my life, their silence meant something. They realized I hadn't just survived. I had walked into a room they never thought I'd be allowed in, not because of them, but in spite of them. I used to be the pride of the Whitmore family. They once called me the legal future of Texas, like that title alone could carry me to the Supreme Court, and I believed them. I really did. I worked at the state attorney general's office, not the easiest place, but I thought I could make a difference. I was leading an audit of public health care contracts, especially those involving Westfall Medical, a powerful private healthcare conglomerate with suspiciously generous state deals. I lived in spreadsheets, document trails, late-night calls with whistleblowers. I wasn't after glory. I was chasing truth. Then I found coded emails, shadow payments, deleted calendar invites, and worse, my father's name tied to a hush payment silencing a nurse who tried to expose elder abuse in a privatized care facility. I filed the report through official whistleblower channels. Every line backed by evidence. No shortcuts, no leaks. I believed I was doing the right thing. 3 days later, I was headline news across Texas. Judge Whitmore's daughter under investigation for evidence tampering. From legal rising star to scandal center, the fall of Sophia Whitmore. I watched the news in silence. They played footage of me walking out of the courthouse, face turned away from the camera like I was already guilty. Then came my father's interview. He didn't say my name, but his voice was steel. We raised our children with the right values. Sometimes people lose their way. After that news segment, I came home. No one said a word over dinner. My mother Janine ate in silent silverware, tapping the plate like a countdown clock. Then she set her fork down, didn't look at me, and said, "If you're too reckless to protect this family's name, don't expect to live under its roof." Landon said nothing. He didn't look at me. I waited for him to say something, anything, but he just sat there head down like he wanted to vanish into the air. The next morning I packed my things. No one offered to help. No one asked me to stay. I moved in with my best friend Rachel Simmons, my law school roommate, the one I studied with through endless nights. If anyone would understand me, it would be her. I was wrong. 3 days later, the press somehow obtained internal emails. Fragments of policy reports I'd sent, annotated with personal notes. Confidential and clearly leaked. The source, Rachel. She only sent me one text. Don't hate me. You've always had that hero complex. You wanted justice. This is what it costs. Turned out she'd been paid off by a PR firm aligned with Westfall Medical. In exchange, they handed her a communications job with the governor's team. They painted me as a traitor, a liar, someone who would smear her own father for clout. Rachel. She was praised as a rising strategy voice in Texas politics. I didn't sue. I didn't protest. I just disappeared. On a rainy Austin night, I climbed onto a westbound bus, carrying nothing but a duffel bag, a battered notebook, and a name I no longer planned to use. The bus dropped me off in a tiny town called Glenbrook, tucked near the New Mexico border. No one knew who I was, and that felt like mercy. I told people my name was Kate Monroe, after my grandmother, the only person who ever said silence in the face of injustice is still complicity. I rented a narrow room above a dusty old bookstore. The window creaked, the heater wheezed like it had stories of its own, and the whole place smelled like paper and cinnamon. I took a part-time job at the local library teaching writing classes for adults, mostly former inmates, single parents, and people left behind by the system. No one asked who I used to be. I told them I used to be a teacher. It wasn't a lie. Not really. At night, I didn't sleep. I sat in that drafty little room, scribbling in silence, not to erase who I was, but to survive who I had become. I wrote one sentence in the back of my tattered notebook. If I can't trust justice to protect me, then I'll become justice myself. There were no speeches, no headlines, no applause. But I had begun again in quiet defiance. And in that stillness, something began to burn. Not brightly, but steadily. I never planned to go back to policy work. But one night at the library, flipping through old state bulletins out of habit, I found a proposal defunding Glenbrook's prisoner reentry program. No protests, no op-eds. But I knew if that bill passed, half my writing students would lose their only shot at rebuilding their lives. I went home, pulled open the drawer, and took out the one USB I'd kept from my prosecutor days. I opened a blank document and drafted a policy response sourced, precise, surgically worded. I didn't sign it. Instead, I created a fictional nonprofit Midwest Community Voice, authored by Senator M. 3 days later, the bill was pulled. No statement, no press release. I didn't celebrate. I just wrote one line in my notebook. I'm not allowed to show up, but I can leave footprints. Soon the name Senator M started circulating in activist circles across Texas. No one knew who I was, and I liked it that way. I didn't want credit. I wanted impact. By day, I taught the overlooked how to write their truths. By night, I rewrote the truths that oppressed them. No one saw me, but they felt me. I met Daniel Brooks on a quiet Thursday afternoon when we both reached for To Kill a Mockingbird at the same time in the library. He smiled and said, "You again?" I couldn't remember the last time someone looked at me without suspicion. Daniel was a high school literature teacher in Glenbrook corduroy jackets, mismatched socks, and a reverence for language that made every word feel like a choice. We started talking more about books about justice, about how the school system fails the loud girls and restless boys. He never asked about my past, and maybe that's why I let myself breathe around him. Slowly, I began to look forward to the sound of his voice, to evenings in his small kitchen, to the scent of cedarwood and chalk dust on his coat. But I still kept one door locked tight. One night he reached across my cluttered desk for a book and paused. His eyes landed on a draft I'd left half buried under lesson plans, a policy response I'd written anonymously. Same language, same tone, same unmistakable fingerprints. He held it delicately. This sounds exactly like that memo Senator M released last week. Did you write this? I smiled too quickly. Not really. I just helped some groups make their messaging clearer. Daniel nodded. But his eyes? They changed. A line had just been drawn, and I had stepped behind it. We still walked together, still cooked together, still read side by side, but from that moment on, my silence had weight, and it was no longer invisible. I always knew I couldn't hide forever, but I didn't expect the name Sophia Whitmore to return like that. It started during a closed-door strategy meeting in the governor's office in Austin. Landon, now a senior comms aide, was trying to impress. When someone asked about his background in policy, he smiled and said, "My sister used to work in the legal office. Brilliant with policy language. She lives somewhere near the New Mexico border now, but she's not really involved anymore." That one casual comment was all Sarah Simmons needed. Sarah, my former friend turned betrayer, was now communications director for Governor Alan Foy. When she heard the name Carla, my birth name, she looked up. Sharp. Calculating. Within weeks, she had reopened digital archives, pulled in linguistic analysts, traced every anonymous memo under the Senator M pseudonym, and dissected them line by line, tone phrasing structure. Then she found it a quiet op-ed dismantling a welfare reform bill. Inside it was one sentence. "Justice delayed is corruption disguised in civility." I had once written that on a whiteboard in our intern office years ago. Sarah had laughed at it then. Not anymore. Now she used it as her first bullet. I never heard her voice, but I could picture the expression as she whispered to her assistant. "If this is Sophia, I'll bury her this time, and she won't come back up." I didn't need headlines to know what was happening. I could feel it like a storm building before the clouds break. My anonymous work had been traced. Nonprofits stopped replying. A legal clinic I volunteered for paused collaboration. Emails bounced. Calls went unanswered. Then came Daniel. I didn't know Sarah had met with him. I found out when I heard his voice on a local radio interview. He was being asked about the coincidence between Senator M and his mysterious friend me. His voice was steady but cold. I think maybe I was just her small-town credibility, a tool for her to rebuild. I heard it while sitting in my car after a late community meeting in El Paso. I didn't get out. I didn't cry. I just sat there wrapped in silence so heavy it hollowed me out. Then Westfall struck back doctored videos, reworded emails, op-eds taken out of context. They built a version of me I couldn't even recognize, calculating, manipulative, disloyal. Someone spray-painted liar across the front of the Glenbrook Library, below it in dripping red. Snake in heels. No one met my eyes when I walked in. Later I sat alone in the back room of the bookstore. I opened the mailbox, mostly junk overdue bills warnings. Then I saw an envelope yellowed unmarked. Inside was a letter. "Ms. Whitmore, you were the only one who didn't look at me like trash. Because of you, I got a job. My daughter calls me Dad. I haven't missed a paycheck in 6 months. You did that. Please don't give up on the rest of us. Malik." I didn't cry. I let the wind move through the cracked window and let the letter speak where I couldn't. Then I stood up. I wrote a single sentence to the only lawyer who had ever believed me. "I want to sue Westfall Medical. I'm not interested in settling. I knew better than to rely on old allies. Politics breeds amnesia." So I turned to a team of independent legal investigators, underfunded, unrecognized, but rich in fire and ethics. In a dim diner off the interstate, I met Lena Hart, a journalist who lost everything after trying to expose Westfall's political contributions. Her eyes were razor sharp, her voice worn but unshaken. "They killed my story, took my press pass. But if you're ready to speak, I'll write, and this time no one's silencing me." I gave her everything: emails, timelines, policy drafts, names, receipts. She didn't write an article. She built a case file. Within a week, she and the legal team uncovered financial trails from Westfall Medical through fake charities to campaign coffers of anti-reform politicians. Sarah Simmons receiving informal communications consulting fees from the same source while working for the governor. We scheduled a press conference at Glenbrook's Community Center. I left the shattered front window unrepaired, our wound exposed, unashamed. No teleprompters, no stagecraft, just me, a woman with her voice still intact. I stepped up, opened the file, and said, "My name is Sophia Whitmore. I'm a Texas state senator, and I was forced into silence so the guilty could thrive. But not anymore. There was no applause, only listening. And that was enough." After the press conference, things didn't explode. They peeled away layer by layer. Sarah Simmons was placed on administrative leave within 24 hours. The governor's office issued a vague statement, internal inquiry underway, but the internet wasn't so forgiving. The hashtag #StandWithSophia spread like wildfire. Senators who once distanced themselves began issuing public statements calling me a symbol of resilience and a voice that refused to be silenced. One even messaged me privately, "I'm sorry I stayed quiet." Even Governor Alan Foy on live television, face tight with regret, admitted, "We underestimated her. But Texas is stronger because of what she endured and what she refused to let destroy her." I didn't feel victorious. I felt still a peace I hadn't known in years. I was invited to speak on the State House floor again. I didn't talk about titles or victories. I told a story. I once had a different name, and in that name I learned how to listen. I was silenced by those I loved and those in power. But today, I speak for those who can't. Later that night, an email arrived in my inbox. Subject line, "Monroe Bill approved." The education reform bill I once drafted as Senator M had passed, this time with a new name. Not Sophia Whitmore, but the Monroe Bill. I chose not to run for re-election. When asked why, I simply said, "I don't need a title to keep fighting. I just need to look in the mirror and know I'm not silent anymore." I started teaching part-time at a small law school in Austin, the same one that once disciplined me years ago. Every few weeks I returned to Glenbrook. No more aliases, no more disguises. Just Sophia. One afternoon, I received a letter from my mother. The paper was soft, a little crumpled, like her voice. "Your father is gone," she wrote. "A stroke. Sudden. I found him in his study holding a photo of you at your law school graduation." He was crying. And then the final line, "He never knew how to love you the right way, but he never stopped being proud of you." I didn't cry. I placed the letter on my desk beside my old notebook. I didn't need to write anything. A week later, Landon showed up at my office. No warning, no appointment. When I opened the door, he said, "I thought if I followed every rule, I'd earn respect, but I lost my compass." I didn't scold. I just said, "You don't have to be anyone's star, Landon. You just have to be kind." And we hugged. No drama, no speech, just presence. I launched a new foundation, the Janine Foundation for Justice, named for my mother, for women in public service who've been forced into silence, teachers, attorneys, whistleblowers. At the opening, an elderly woman approached, hands trembling. I was laughed out of a school board hearing for calling out harassment. Today, a senator looked me in the eye and said, "You deserve to be believed." Thank you for that. I smiled, not because I'd been forgiven, but because my voice had found its destination.